Hello friends! In today's video we'll teach you how to create your first diorama using a picture frame and products from AK Interactive. The first thing we'll do is to remove the paper and the glass from the frame, leaving only the wooden board. This will be our work table. You may remember this FJ43 from a previous video, and we also have some figures that will accompany the vehicle. Now's the time to plan the diorama. We need to think about where the different parts will go, and we can write on the board to indicate their location. After this step, we can get to work. We'll cover the entire surface with glue and place a cork sheet on top. As you can see, we've used some binder clips to hold down the edges. We have cut up a strip of the cork sheet which will go on top. This will be our road. We can trim the edges of this road using a cutting tool to make it appear a bit more realistic. Next, we'll apply this asphalt texture. We can apply it using a spatula. The idea is to apply a thin and uniform layer. We need to extend the texture as much as possible with the spatula. If the layer you achieve is too thick, you don't need to worry too much, as you can use a file or a sanding material to make it a little thinner. Let's now add richness to our asphalt texture. To do so, we only need to apply these two colors, ash gray and tenebrous gray, with a dry brush. The dry brushing technique is very easy. It consists of removing the paint on a piece of a paper towel, and with the brush strokes we make the paint only gather in the most prominent areas of the texture. If you want to lighten it up, try to remove even more of the paint from your brush and then apply the brighter tone from the two paints that we've used before. In our case, it would be the ash gray. That's it for the road for now. We'll move on to the other two corners where we'll apply desert sand. Once again, we're using a spatula to extend the product over the surface. Afterwards, we'll use other kinds of tools to give it more texture. So when it comes to adding texture to our terrains, there are plenty of tools that will come in handy. As you can see here, we can use an old brush and create irregular patterns imitating dunes or sand accumulation. If what we want is a more regular pattern with less relief, the sponge will be the way to go. After we have finished with the texture, this is what it should look like. And while our texture is drying, we can move on and start working on the different accessories that we'll be using for our diorama, such as these big concrete barriers. As you can see, these barriers come in two parts. One is the wall itself, and then there is the top part, which has different variations. We've picked this metal hook option so that we can paint rust as well. Remember that these are resin parts, which means that the glue for plastic will not work. Instead, we must use the cyanoacrylate glue. We apply a couple of drops of the glue and hold the parts together for a few seconds, and that's it. If we want to cover the gaps between the two pieces, we can use the modeling white putty. Once again, we can use our trusty spatula. At this point, and after a lot of thought, we decided we weren't sure about the texture we've applied being the right fit for what we wanted to do, and we've decided to switch to this other one, dry ground. This one was more in line with the desolated terrain with some civilization that we were going for. Notice that this is yet another way to apply the texture, this time using a bigger brush. While the texture is still wet, we can add some rocks, such as this small railroad ballast. We sprinkle them on top of the surface. Another possibility are these big grey rocks. We can use both at the same time. Glue won't be necessary. If we apply a consistent layer of the texture, it will serve to keep the rocks in place. When adding new elements to a scenery or diorama, it's convenient to do a trial first, like we did in the corner. That way, if we don't like the result, we would have the option to remove the rocks and readjust the texture so that this change of heart wouldn't be noticeable. Keep this piece of advice in mind before going all in with an idea, as when the texture dries completely, it will be much harder to fix. Now we're outlining the area for these barriers. And we'll remove the leftover putty using a paper towel with some alcohol. As you can see, this putty is very easy to work with, which is why it has become a staple in our projects. After we have cleaned up our barriers, we'll prime them in black. We've diluted the paint to be able to apply it with an airbrush. We spray the paint little by little. And gradually we're covering the entire surface with a solid coat of paint, all the way until you can no longer see the resin underneath. Now we'll paint these walls with warm gray. As you can see, the way that we apply this paint is very irregular, as we want to play around with the tone that the concrete offers, which doesn't tend to offer much variety. Next, we'll use the desert dust pigment diluted with the fruit-scented thinner. This way we can add tone variations to the dry ground's texture. When we're finished with the desert dust, we'll create some dust patches on the central part of the road. For this step, we'll use the light soil pigment. Remember that if you're not happy with the appearance after you use liquid pigments, you can fix it with some thinner, which makes these liquid pigments a very versatile tool. We'll continue with medium earth to create some random colored patches in the area of the dry ground. With these liquid pigments, we can add variety to our diorama by creating very easily patches of different colors that will make our diorama look less monotonous and more interesting. All these colors we're using are similar and earth-like that keep in line with the appearance of dried ground that we're going for. And as we said before, if you don't like the effect, it's easy to fix. For example, we will now proceed to reduce and blend the dust stain we've created in the middle of the road. To do this, we only need to wet our brush in thinner, and little by little we reduce the area where we have previously applied it. Let's move on to the barrels now. We'll prime some of them with the black primer, like we did with the concrete barriers. This especially affects the barrels that will be painted with dark colors. For lighter colored barrels, we'll use this Robot White Dual Exo paint, and we'll apply it directly. When choosing the colors for the barrels, use your imagination or draw inspiration from what you can see in your daily life. For this barrel, we've chosen to alternate red and white areas. You can see something similar on tracks for car racing. If we want to imitate an older paint that's quite deteriorated because it's exposed to different elements, we can pick a very diluted light color and apply it in an irregular way all over the surface. Once dry, it will look like the paint is starting to chip and lift off in some areas. The third generation acrylic paints have great coverage, so we won't have any issue when painting yellow on top of a black surface. And remember to take advantage of all the different techniques that are within your possibility, such as the one we've shown you before, the dry brushing technique. We can use it to highlight this black barrel with some gray paint. When weathering objects, there are plenty of options that we can choose from. One of them is the wash. We can apply a dark rust wash over this yellow barrel. It's necessary to dilute the paint as much as possible and then we apply it over our barrel, doing it in a regular way and letting it pool into deeper areas. For blue colors, we can use black or dark blue, for example. The process is the same as before, but we've switched to the tenebrous gray paint. This color adapts perfectly to both cold and warm colors, as you can see on this red-white barrel. But that is not our only option. Apart from washes, we can use the liquid pigments. They are great to imitate natural deposits such as dust, dirt, and rust. So go ahead and give them a try. And to make them work quicker, we can use a travel hairdryer. This reduces the drying time and lets us work on more parts of the diorama during the same painting session. However, keep in mind that it shouldn't be used with everything and anything. There are products that the hairdryer is not recommended to be used with. For example, it doesn't work very well with texture paints. One of the advantages of liquid pigments is that their own nature makes it possible to mix them while still wet. This gives us the possibility to create unique color variations. Even if we were to use the same paints on two objects, the mixture won't be the same. That's something that works great when mixing wet rust pigments, as the different tones will mix together, creating very random and realistic patterns of rust. Moreover, when you finished working with the liquid pigments, you only need to seal them with varnish. So if you haven't tried them out yet, we highly recommend them. You'll soon discover that they're a very versatile tool. Let's get back to our concrete barriers. The next step will be to work on the metal hooks that these barriers have on top to move them around. We're using different tones of rust for these hooks: black, dark rust, and light rust. By using these colors, we can make the rust more diverse. We're mainly using the light rust, as this kind of rust tends to be the newest. And apart from that, it's the kind of rust that comes off the most easily, and so we can create a small stain of very diluted paint, imitating the rust that could have been dragged by the moisture of the atmosphere. When we're happy with what our concrete walls look like, we try out the position on the diorama to make sure that everything will fit together nicely. After some thought, we've decided to join the two barriers together in order to be able to work with them more easily, and so they would be aligned in the best possible way. We just need some cyanoacrylate glue and hold the two pieces together for a few seconds so that the glue can dry. Then we'll put some glue on the base of the barriers as well, and hold them in place another couple of seconds so they're set firmly in place. We'll follow the same procedure with the barrels. Here you can see the result of the weathering we've done using the liquid pigments. What do you think? In the end, we've decided not to use the yellow barrel, so there wouldn't be too many of them. Let's place the one that's red and white along with the blue barrel in the front, and we'll leave the black one in the back. Once again, we've used the cyanoacrylate glue. And now let's add some vegetation, shall we? We'll use the 6mm wild tufts and 6 and 12mm dry tufts. As you can see, we're using some tweezers to place these tufts around the scenery. When we're happy with the result, we'll use either white glue or the cyanoacrylate glue to make their position permanent. If we want to create a devastated and somewhat desert-like area, the trick is not to overdo it with the flora. And at the same time, we shouldn't use tufts or shrubs that are too intensely green. We want something that looks arid, dry, and that doesn't clash with the general theme of the diorama. So after we have placed the tufts, which has admittedly taken a while to do, this is what the scene looks like. We could add some more things in the front, some debris, palette, or something of that kind, but we've decided not to overdo it, as our goal is to make the vehicle and its crew the focal point of this diorama. We've decided to paint the frame black, and then we just need to place the vehicle and the figures, once again using the cyanoacrylate glue. We don't have the intention to go anywhere with this diorama, so we haven't used pins for the figures, but if you are going to travel with it to take it to a competition or somewhere else, it's recommended that you use metal pins between the figure and the board. And after all these steps, this is what our first diorama looks like. We hope you like the result as much as we like to create it for you. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you soon!